At this time, I'd like to turn today's program over to Canada Health Infoway. The floor is yours.
Everyone, this is Giokas. I head up the Emerging Technology Group. Just a few logistics points. We are recording this session such that we can post it on the Infoway website after this event, and you can have access to it, and we'll use that for future internal and external educational sessions. And as the host said, please use the chat feature to ask questions. We have a lot of attendees that have registered, so that'll be the best way we can facilitate dealing with all of your questions. I will read out the question and hand it to the appropriate person to answer that, but we will not share the name of the person who posed the question. Just from a disclaimer perspective, move the slide. This webinar represents solely Infoway's views. It's intended for information only. It's not meant to represent what we are investing in or might invest in the future. And we will mention some products, and this is not meant to promote or endorse any specific products, nor do we have any interest in any of the products or services we might be mentioning in that context. So before we get into the meat of the presentation, since this is our first webinar from our group, I'd like to just give you a very quick sense as to who we are and what we do. In the context of setting up the group, we developed a mission and vision statement. I just want to highlight a few points from each of those for you. Our role primarily is to identify, assess, and promote viable, what I term emerging and disruptive information and communication technologies. And the result of that research that we do, we will develop white papers or other means of communicating our views to our various stakeholders through a set of investigation and recommendation white papers. And hopefully you've seen the one we posted on the web with respect to cloud, and we have some more coming out over the next few months. Our vision, therefore, is emerging technologies are appropriately and effectively used in promoting the health of Canadians and the sustainability of the healthcare system. So some of the questions we attempt to answer in these papers: what are the innovations in health and health IT? What exists today that we should be using? We find generally that health is a laggard with respect to using some new technologies, and that's not specific to Canada, that's literally around the world. So what should we promote and consider to use in that context? And what is emerging that we might want to consider using in the near term or at some future term as well? And then very important as well, what are generating real value and which one have value to apply? We try to differentiate our work from the work of others in a number of dimensions. I'll start out with business first. We're focused on topics that are relevant to Infoway and our stakeholders. We attempt to take a very objective perspective, and we do analyze these and report on these and make our recommendations. Our objective is not to go deep into any of these technologies, especially technically deep. We want to stay more broad versus going deep. I'll take a very broad stakeholder perspective. So what might this mean to decision makers, let's say the C-level executive? What might it mean to the IT department, to the users, maybe typically clinicians or administrators, and even to consumers, where some of these technologies might touch consumers, especially in a health context. We'll always take a health perspective in our reports, then drill that down, can health perspective, and then if it's appropriate, take a look at that technology in the context of Canada's strategic priorities and plans with respect to digital health as well. From a technical perspective, again, if applicable, we'll look at privacy and security. In the case of cloud, we did a very in-depth look at privacy and security considerations. Other topics might include deployment considerations, the application of that technology to specific health use cases, and the relationship of that technology to other aspects of the digital health ecosystem that our various stakeholders are deploying or have already deployed. So further ado, I want to turn this over to Ron Parker. Ron led a team of four of us on the development of this paper, and he is going to walk us through this presentation. So, Ron, over to you.
So, hello to this webinar on cloud computing in Canadian healthcare. We hope you enjoy the material. It's just a really light touch, frankly, on what can be a really robust subject. We're hoping that it'll provide some information as well as some guidance and some insight for you as we consider this topic and what its potential impact might be on healthcare. So we'll computing as part of this presentation, describe its features, illustrate relevance to healthcare, describe a possible scenario for use. It's just one scenario, but we'll walk through that just to give some illustration. And then we'll hit some we feel are the really key messages that are regarding cloud and healthcare that arose from the work in the white paper, and also speak to cloud as an enabler of innovation and sustainable transformation in healthcare. Now, something remarkable actually has been happening in technology, and it's been happening at a very accelerated pace in the last 2 years, and Gartner refers to this as the nexus of forces that are driving things, one of which is the proliferation and accessibility of information, the implementation or the use of mobile applications on an incredible scale now. Shipping of mobile phones is now finally, mobile devices, smartphones to be specific, has exceeded that of desktop, laptop, other forms of computing. Networking, of course, is very, very prevalent now, and people are engaging with it in new and innovative ways. And of course, the topic for today, which is the use of cloud as an enabler in terms of a technology to support actually these other three things. So these are all converging as a result of consumerization, ubiquity of connected devices. Certainly, we need to be on top of this and understand what the potential implications are for healthcare. So the first is that information really is the context for delivering enhanced social and mobile experiences. Critical in terms of having it and being able to exchange it and share it. Really, the power of it is that it provides context for what we do, how we do it, why we do it. Mobile device, an effective platform for social networking, and for new ways of working. People to work and each other in new and unexpected ways. Finally, delivery of information and functionality to users and systems. Gartner's sense is that the forces of the nexus are intertwined to create user-driven ecosystems of computing. Now, we're going to do this presentation on cloud, and then we're going to revisit this statement, characterized particularly from a healthcare perspective, to see how this applies once we finish the exercise. Examples of cloud-enabled solutions are already in use today. Many of us actually are already using cloud and may not be aware of it. If you use Gmail on Google, if you are like Netflix, if you use Amazon to buy or sell, if you're an iTunes user, an iPod, iPad, iPhone user, you're putting content into the cloud, you're a user as well. And then there are many other organizations that are also using this capability pervasively now across a lot of different platforms and applications. Dealing with this, prevalent this growth in cloud, the Emerging Technology Group produced this document, Cloud Computing and Health, part of our Emerging Technology series. The first in white papers, it's designed to address cloud from a Canadian healthcare perspective. And what is that? It will help scope and provide insight on the applicability and utility for the technology, while at the same time providing some context for what the business opportunities, but also the challenges might be adopting it, simple approaches, and also call to action for further focused conversations on this topic. This is really something we need to share as we go forward in understanding, develop a better sense of what it is and what it is not, and then hopefully deploy it and use it effectively. So now the three major components of cloud, and for those that are unaware of what cloud is, this is just a little bit of a primer around the basic aspects of cloud. Three things we'll talk about are computing infrastructure, free service models, models. The first major of cloud computing is the idea that the infrastructure is virtualized. So whether that's the network or the processors themselves or where the data is stored, this is all virtualized, which means that it's able to be provided on demand that the access to these services is essentially self-service. And the key to this is that the capacity is there when you need it. In other words, the cloud is readily available, access transparently. It has network access, meaning reliable and stable bandwidth is really what makes cloud possible across a range of devices. So the ubiquity, the prevalence on a lot of device platforms is important. The services that are being used in cloud in terms of delivering computing technology are shared among many users. This is where we really get the cost savings and the price point. And that is big. This is the other really important thing, particularly if you're paying for cloud capacity based upon actual use. This capacity can increase and decrease virtually instantly on demand. What that means, instead of having a lot of capacity that you have to build for only peak capabilities, if you're providing your capabilities in terms of applications and other services in the cloud, you can scale up and scale back and only pay for the resources that you're using, but be confident you can do that dynamically very, very quickly. And the fundamental part of this is this idea of a measured service. So the only way to be able to provide such a service that can scale like that can be costed according to its scaling, is to be able to measure that. The service provision is very carefully managed, and you pay by use. The second major component of cloud computing is a three-service model. So cloud right now actually has clients, of course, and they could be web browsers or mobile apps, thin clients, terminal emulators. And then they have three dimensions with this acronym AAS, which is as a service. First one is software as a service. Software is provided over the internet. For example, Microsoft now provides its entire Office suite as an enabled service where you subscribe to the service, and based upon having good bandwidth where you are on the device you're accessing the applications, you can pull down those applications and run them without actually having to have them installed locally on your machine. This means liberation or installation locally. It's available wherever a user actually has a good connection and very accessible, very rapid. The next service is platform as a service. And when we think about this, we think about runtime environments, databases, web servers, development tools, things that middleware typically are in the platform as a service. Underlying all of this is the idea of infrastructure as a service. And this is really the thing that provides the basic components to be able to provide platforms, or for that matter, software in the cloud. There are virtual machines that are able to span multiple processors and scale dynamically, servers, storage, load balancers, things that manage the load, as well as the network capacity and other aspects. So that's the second component. Major cloud computing, and this is really where we'll spend our time today in this webinar, is around the four deployment models. We have called private cloud, which is the cloud customized for one organization and totally controlled by that organization. Community is a cloud used by a community of organizations for shared purposes with shared and shared management. Public cloud, totally open to the public and managed expressly by the vendor. So, for example, if you are Microsoft providing that suite of applications, or you're Netflix providing access to movie on demand, that's public cloud, where you subscribe to the service. How it's provided and where that stuff comes from is completely invisible to the end user. Just know reliably that they have a face and they have access to the application. Model, which is, like your answer to the multiple choice question, all of the above, in a hybrid model where you actually combine the first three models based upon different criteria. And we're going to talk about how you might choose to do that in the next set of slides. So one of the challenges that we face in healthcare is, given these aspects of cloud as well as the models, how do I know what model to use? It's important that each one of these deployment models has different implications for use. The degree of control, your transparency, and the accountability that is there in terms of the particular cloud you choose is very important. And by the way, when we talk about accountability, we're really talking about the ability to assert and make sure that the custodian responsibilities around the data that's manipulated and represented in the cloud is appropriately managed. Governance of infrastructure, this is very, very important, as particular aspects of public cloud, community cloud, You need to be sure that all the participants that are playing in it, the people that are providing it, those that are consumers of it, understand their roles and how the infrastructure is structured, and that it is reliable and appropriately and effectively managed. At a small point are concerns around privacy and security. And healthcare is very, very focused on privacy and security right from the outset. Certainly Infoway, in terms of the work that we've done, we've exerted a considerable amount of effort in this area. And of course, this is also very, very important of cloud, and we'll illustrate that as we go through the presentation and explain it a little bit. The concept here is that when you move to cloud and when you're actually accessing these capabilities as a service, you're moving from a capital expenditure model where maybe you're a facility or a clinic, or for that matter, an individual clinician, for example, that is purchasing equipment and software, or you're an individual user in your home where you're accessing information, you use all of your own things. When you access applications through the cloud, you're actually paying for service. And what that means is you move from a capital expenditures model where you plan for, you acquire equipment, the hardware, you tender for this, you then implement it, you stand it up, and you operate it. A lot of that capital expenditure simply goes away, and what you're faced with, however, is now corresponding operational expenditures. And one of the challenges we have in healthcare particularly is that, how do you budget for a flex capacity in terms of actual usage in an operational space? We'll talk about that a bit more as we go. The challenge that we have is there's seeing is a single cloud vendor offering everything soup to nuts that you need in the cloud. Very often, if you're going to participate in cloud, what you end up with is actually multiple cloud service providers, multiple solutions, and how do you manage that process? And what happens when one of those services is unavailable? And that means that you can't actually provide the application to your end users. So these are things to consider in terms of looking at the model. So the first look at is the idea of private cloud. And the main thing to see in this picture is that we have a rectangular box that outlines the cloud, holds the cloud, contains it within. This is a cloud. And so that private cloud is operated, it's stood up, it's operated and owned within the boundaries of that private entity or that particular organization. This is the concept of private. So this will actually be a health center, a hospital facility. They provide some of their capability or all of their capability enabled through cloud, but they completely manage it, which is what makes it private. So applications that may use aspects of cloud, or there may be applications provided in cloud by the organization. And in this order, then, some of the advantages are it is secure and accountable. You have to start up new applications rapidly. So once you're in the cloud space and you've got cloud enabled for providing those applications, your ability to stand up a new application in the cloud is very rapid. But you get your technology capacity, so there's some reduction in cost. And what that means is instead of having to have purchased for peak periods where nominally you're only using about 10% of your computing capacity, you actually can maximize the use of the computing resources that you have by using these dynamic virtual capacities of the cloud capabilities to deliver your application. There are disadvantages. And of course, what that organization actually now has capital costs to actually set up the cloud. So there is some cost of entry in terms of using this capability. It may not be cheaper overall, and what we mean by that is the cost of running IT is typically running 3% or less in most healthcare service delivery organizations in the country today. And even when you deploy an application, a significant amount of the cost of deployment is actually not in the IT at all. It's actually in the business side of delivering health services. So people, process, implementation of procedures, these other things. So really you have to be careful when you look at the claims around reduction in cost. Yes, we can reduce IT costs. I believe that's absolutely true. But the degree to which you can do that and the degree to which it will impact your organization is variable. Now, the next model is community cloud. And in community cloud, what we have is one or more organizations share cloud assets. And that have localized applications that are reaching into the cloud, perhaps for data, perhaps what shares data, or perhaps what is middleware, or perhaps they're just simply sharing network capacity or data storage. Or both of those organizations may actually be sharing a common application that is actually served as software as a service. And that can be very, very helpful if you want an organization where you have a need to share capacity, or you need to be able to share that application across users in the two different settings, potentially multiple settings. So there are advantages to this. Again, secure and accountable in the sense that whatever that community is, as it defines that cloud, it structures it and makes sure that that's the case. Applications very, very rapidly. You have broad reach in this model. I mean, you could have actually a large number of organizations as part of your community and virtually supported. A lot of utilization of the technology capacity, as well as sharing of the capital costs to establish that cloud. And that's a very, very interesting proposition, because when we talk about the ability to use capacity flexibly, organizations decide, you know what, we'll reduce our overall capital cost by sharing this particular resource and then dynamically allocating it as needed. Disadvantages to community cloud are the governance of shared resources. That can be complex, and we don't have a lot of history with that. There are some areas in the country that have been quite successful in establishing regional models with collaborative relationships between the organizations. These are organizations that have already worked through these challenges, and they're probably pretty good candidates for doing this. It may be a natural fit. But it's not a trivial thing to take on, and it really does require a very strong vision and clear expression of the goals of the sharing, as well as an ability to measure how that's actually working. And of course, they're shifted from capital to operational on a demand basis. And again, now getting into the scenario, so how do we actually budget for the operational nature of this? I mean, when a particular department or one particular organization in a community is using a certain proportion of the shared asset, they rationalize those costs, and can we predict that in advance? Again, is now pretty much wide open, and this is where the boundaries associated with what the applications are that we're using and the sort of responsibility and understanding of that accountability is really for each individual user who is using that application, whether they've got an application that's accessing data in the cloud, or more actually most public applications are software as a service. Now, the cost to the individual user for actual usage typically are very, very low. Depending upon the scale of the cloud, you're spreading out the cost of ownership, if you are operating of it, to a very, very potentially large number of people. So it could be very low cost of entry, lower per usage costs for the large pool of users. And again, the advantage here is that if there are applications already in that space, the ability to person to that and get them up and running is almost immediate. Just particularly for healthcare is the very limited accountability. Most public providers of cloud applications provide much transparency in terms of where the data lives, managing that asset. So these issues that may be very, very important from a public expectation in terms of personal health information, things is a little trickier here. So there are potential privacy security challenges. And of course, if you're allowing all of your users, whether they be clients or patients in a province or in a health region, or for that matter, practitioners, in person acquire these things, and or those are then billed back into the system, it could be very, very difficult to budget before, because these people can acquire these applications very, very, very readily. And then what we wanted to speak to is this idea of hybrid. And so in a sense that, there are actually multiple clouds here, public, community, and private, and they're used in different ways. Again, and here is that it's unlikely that either private, community, or public will fit all of the needs of healthcare. They're appropriate for different purposes. We'll explore that in a moment. Cloud usage matched to the different models is appropriate for the application, and there's compartmentalization of capability, meaning you can then sort of port into the cloud and use the cloud appropriately where you are using that resource to its most effective capability, while at the same time managing your privacy concerns as well as your accountability concerns. Of course, with anything where it's complex, where you have many dimensions of it, this requires a very thoughtful strategic plan and an incremental roadmap to achieve. It would be able to expect that you could stand up this degree of complexity with all of the governance and accountability issues associated with it and do that really, really rapidly. It requires a good plan. And it certainly would also require coordinated procurement principles and practices, because by definition, if you're looking at hybrid in this model, You have potentially many hospital organizations perhaps that are using or standing up elements of private cloud. There is an element of community cloud with that shared governance, and also you have these public assets and you have to use them. Now, on the note of our next slide about a possible use scenario. Now, in this, what we describe is here we have private cloud, a hospital that is running operational systems, clinical systems, and some of its specialized applications in a private cloud that it manages, that it provides resources for, that it has full accountability for. In ability, that hospital may also be participating in a community cloud. And some of the things that would be very appropriate to place in a community cloud, things like a chronic disease management program, which could be applications, many sets of information resources that are accessed by many different care providers as well as patients in different capacities. So we care transition, managing the transition out of acute care into home care, into long-term care, and then back into acute care when there are episodes that need to be dealt with. Managing chronic disease management for people with multiple comorbidities associated with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or their diabetes. And then also functional things could be provided in the community cloud, such as electronic referrals. So you could put a framework for allowing to refer across organizational boundaries between GPs and specialists and make that for your community cloud. That might be very appropriate. As well as provide a consolidated scheduling capability to improve access by providers and by patients to the services that are provided in a health region or in a jurisdiction. And then there are assets that we could put in the public cloud very readily. So reference information, and by the way, this would be in terms of clinical decision support. So a local application which is accountable, private, and secure, whether that be in the community cloud or in the private cloud, provides context information. Back to this idea of information as context. I know who I am as a provider in a particular care setting, in a particular role, with a particular patient, with particular needs. And upon that information, I can reach into the public cloud to find things that will help me make decisions about that patient's needs, reference information to be able to be provided and accessed by that patient potentially through their own consumer application. Or be provide, for example, for a community of patients that care about their condition and like to share between each other their experiences and also to gain some reassurance as well as some confidence that they can manage those conditions. Social applications could be provided here. Our key, by the way, as we describe this model of public cloud, is that there would not be any personal health information in there. It's an assertion we're making right now that I think is probably pretty reasonable. And we can solve for the personal health information storage needs through the other two models. So this is a very simplistic proposition around what we think a possible use scenario for cloud might be. Again, the last hybrid slide. This would require some planning, probably an incremental roadmap to achieve it, but you could do that progressively. Stand up an application in the private sense, perhaps one in the community cloud, and then one aspect of that in the public cloud, and be able to actually see benefit from that. And then as you get comfortable and as you learn how to use these mechanisms, and as your users and end clients see it, start to populate with more capabilities and more applications. So that's scenario, and now it's time to move to what do we think the key messages are around doing this. First, I already know that cloud is one of the top 3 CIO technology priorities in many sectors, and certainly becoming increasingly visible to the public and to healthcare providers as individuals. I'm sorry, I think that's good. Second, the key messages, and actually this is a very important one for those that are partnering with Infoway. Canada Health Infoway, if you're not aware, has been endowed by the federal government with funds to actually accelerate the adoption of information technology, particularly around electronic health records. For those of you that are partners with us in building this, key to understand is that right from the outset, this picture, which we've used, we call this our infrastructure placemat, shows applications at the bottom, standards-based interfaces to a common access point, which we call the health information access layer. And above that, all of the assets that are sort of provide that allow us to identify clients, providers, locations of service delivery, that allow us to have shared information stored around lab, drug, imaging information, as well as events about the patient's passage through the healthcare system that might be clinically relevant for providers to access. all of this information really, frankly, can be software as a service. Those that are actually standing up these infrastructures are not, if they're layering like this, the way that we've designed it in the architecture, to virtualize those resources is actually not that difficult. It almost immediately transforms what they're doing into a jurisdictional infrastructure cloud. And this is really a cloud software as a service model, where all of the applications then are accessing that capability virtually. And software as a service, we think, actually are very necessary computing models if what you want is data where your users are anywhere, where they a lot of different devices, any potential device that's network attached, and where they want access at any time. And to be able to do that really scalably, you really do need to consider this capacity of cloud and the ability to virtualize and provide that infrastructure. Now, one thing about this list, as we were working our way through this problem, is we had assertions that we've been using right from the outset around the establishment of electronic health record solutions in Canada, which is the 5 R's, which are the right information about the right client, the person in the right place at the right time. And if you look at these two things, they dovetail almost exactly. So this just reinforces the message that if the 5 R's are what we want to achieve around electronic health record solutions and digital health, this is a potentially very, very useful technology to use. So some key things, there are many opportunities for use of cloud and health. I think probably the best way to approach this, and we've thought about this a lot as we were developing the white paper, is greenfield developments in community settings or program levels, where we're really net new things, are probably a very, very good choice. The challenges associated with transporting known infrastructure that is actually viable and working to a cloud model are significant. And again, users may not actually see, it may not be visible, the perceived difference. So while we may achieve cost savings, it's a little hard to rationalize the effort and time that it will take, because it would be considerable to do that. Also, we have opportunities in terms of as a necessary computing model for things like electronic referral, clinical decision support, personal health records, chronic disease management, and remote monitoring, just to name a few things. There's an opportunity here for anything that essentially transcends any one organization, any one care setting, or any one set of software applications to use cloud for this purpose. We go about doing that. We really think seriously about the roadmaps, developing roadmaps, understanding what the business cases are to the best that we can. And I have to say, remember, cloud is a new and emergent technology, and particularly in healthcare, we don't actually have a lot of demonstrated and applied use cases yet. So as a community, I think we need to go gently, but go forward, expect a benchmark, expecting to be able to measure, and then be able to build upon that knowledge to allow the rest of the community to be effective in terms of their choices around using cloud. To gradually migrate existing infrastructures to private or community clouds, and then how to determine healthcare programs potentially in a hybrid environment. Now, privacy and security considerations, and I'll give this away now. Our next webinar on this topic will be a deeper dive in terms of the privacy security implications. If you're a customer of our white paper, if you've downloaded that white paper, you'll notice we do treat the whole topic, but we actually, Section 8 provides a more depth in terms of the privacy and security considerations because it is such an important topic. So all models have a similar set of privacy, IT, security risks and requirements, authorized access to information and the resources, for example, consent models or role-based access control. And in regard, cloud computing really is known. Privacy issues are manageable, but they must be by design and take into account the cloud context. In other words, that deployment model really is a significant factor in the choices that you make about how you will address those concerns. And of course, security differentiators are the level of transparency, the degree of oversight you have, the auditability you have of what's happening with the information, the governance that you can exert over the particular deployment model, and the management of your privacy and security. All things to think. But when we think of if we can address, and we do believe the privacy and security issues are manageable, they just have to be engineered right in from the outset. Cloud as an enabler, I mean, the scalability and extensibility made possible by virtualization and service-oriented architecture could be a success factor for coping with the proliferation of mobile devices and apps. And this is the big thing that's happening right now. Around achieving interoperability and being able to have patients' information available where it needed to be, we really, at that time, working in a paradigm of applications. Tablets were not really in existence. Smartphones were just becoming emergent, and there wasn't a lot of apps. And now there are tens of thousands of applications in the smartphone space at all. Certainly an iPad or another tablet user in the Android space now as well. There's a significant number of applications. And what healthcare is going to need to step up to is that the consumers who are using these types of applications and mobile in their everyday lives are going to expect healthcare, absolutely. And they won't understand why we can't embrace and impress the services and provide quality services using these capabilities. And we think this is a very significant component in making that possible. Understand that healthcare faces ongoing fiscal financial constraints. These are very significant, and what we have to be able to do is do more with less, or do more with what we have. And in terms of using cloud as a way of improving the capacity to use the processing capabilities that we've got, to load that, do it more dynamically, but also to be able to be agile in terms of responding to these social and mobile drivers. Very, very, very important. So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the nexus of forces in digital health. And to revise the language associated with that statement to talk about it in the following way. And really, this is pretty important. Health information, we think, and the point of applications, whether they be a consumer health application or the application used by a general practitioner or by a specialist or in an acute care environment, really that health information is the context for delivering enhanced collaborative, coordinated experiences. Really about the ability to improve the experience of the patient, but also the experience of the provider in terms of the way they do what they do, their confidence and their capabilities and what they can bring to the patient. Service systems and mobile devices are platforms for effective social networks, ways of working. We've already seen this. And the ecosystems lead people to work in each other in new and unexpected ways. This is a pretty big assertion, and we're still really working on understanding what does a health IT ecosystem look like. And then addressing this nexus of forces really gives us a good focal point to be able to understand that and actually work our way through developing that capability. Health infrastructure as software as a service in the cloud enable delivery of information and functionality to users. And I think this is very effective, very important key point. And of the nexus are intertwined to create a user-driven ecosystem for digital health. So we've frankly adapted that, but I have to say, based upon all the work that we've looked at as well as the material we've gone through in the presentation today, I think this is absolutely true and something we require. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Actually, that went very well, much quicker than I expected, so we have lots of time for questions. I'll open the floor to people that want to offer questions through the moderator.
This is Dennis Giokas again. Just as a reminder for those listening in, you can ask a question by locating the floating toolbar at the top center and click on the chat panel and enter your question through that chat panel. We've gotten one question so far, so I'll read out and we'll cover that one off while others are perhaps entering their questions. Are privacy and security issues unique to community and public clouds only? And is it possible for messages to be captured from portable devices and interpreted? We'll go into this topic in a lot more depth, as Ron indicated earlier. We'll do a webinar strictly on the privacy and security aspects of cloud, but I'll just cover this one off very quickly. There are unique privacy and security issues with respect to community and public clouds, and there are some with respect to private clouds as well that have to be dealt with. In particular, if you put a private cloud, effectively outsource the private cloud to a vendor, you're going to have to deal with some of those issues around privacy and security and attestation of that and governance of that vendor in that context of standing up the private cloud through that outsourced vendor. So keep those in mind. As far as messages being captured and interpreted, that would be true from any kind of device, whether it's a desktop, laptop, or portable or mobile device, and the requirements on securing and encrypting any communications between any 2 points in that communication chain still have to hold true even in a normal step of infrastructure as well as standing up a cloud infrastructure. Question I got in is, are there any examples of jurisdictions using the cloud, and what kind of systems? Ron, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So what we're seeing actually are small-scale implementations in some cases. I mean, there are other applications. You know, if you have the white paper, we talk about the possibility of using R and other things in terms of capabilities with cloud. What we are seeing is development of certain applications that, if not in cloud today, are intended to move to cloud. One of the examples we provide, for example, in our white papers, we know that University Health Network had an application around transition inside their facility that readily be extended in terms of being able to support collaborative care as well as the transition of patients both within the facility but also on discharge from the facility to that community care team or that care team associated with the patient. So that's an example. There are other examples where this kind of work is evolving and developing. And happening in some senses almost organically, because it turns out that use of mobile devices and other pads, iPads particularly, are very fundamental components to that. But generally, in terms of large-scale implementations, no, I don't know of many today that are actually operational.
We got a note on availability. So remember, this presentation will be available as a link so you can replay it, and we will also post a PDF of the presentation file as well for those who need to reference it, and certainly would encourage you to download and read the paper. There's an exec summary version in English and French, and the full paper in English as well. A question, Ron, for you. What defines the status as a private cloud? Virtual machines that are not shared, physical machines? So a little definition on what makes a private cloud a private cloud.
What makes a private cloud is essentially, I think, the boundary around who manages and owns that private cloud. So there are capacities for you to stand up a private cloud where you are actually the cloud provider, where the devices that you're using, the physical hardware, network, etc., you are provisioning within your own organizational boundaries in a virtual sense. It's possible to consider private cloud to be virtualized as well if there are just some elements of your infrastructure as a service that you are using. That's a much more low-level component. But I think the key thing that defines it is the scope of control, accountability, the governance, and who actually owns the assets that are being deployed.
Ron, another related question. How do you deal with PHIPA? For those who aren't aware, PHIPA is Ontario's Personal Health Information Act, Privacy Act, and knowing that the data are in Canada, data will be stored in Canada. Maybe you could comment on the geographic reach of these clouds.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the challenges with private clouds is the very nature of the provision and also the price point, not a small issue, is that you can't necessarily know where the data is stored. So it's possible, however, for a provider to be able to stand up a private cloud and constrain it within the boundaries of Canada or within a personal jurisdiction. That's not impossible. That's definitely doable. But the key then is that you have to have that accountability. So there are PHIPA that outlines a number of controls, if you will, as well as responsibilities of custodians of the information that have to be respected, and they would have to be respected in the community cloud as well as in the private model. More difficult to do with public, not impossible. I mean, there are models where we could have the transparency, if you will, and the auditability, but I think tougher to do, and certainly at the price point that most public cloud offerings are done, that might be the prohibiting factor. So I think from a community perspective as well as a private perspective, that's probably the greatest path to success. Again, with community-based cloud, the meeting PHIPA requirements is really going to require that you have very excellent governance, the transparency of that governance, and you have assurances and audit processes and an ability to provide those metrics, allow you to have confidence that the custodianship is being
Great. Another question, do you see any special concerns when developing cloud for deployment in regional healthcare delivery settings versus a centralized setting?
You know, the special concerns, I think, not so more than a jurisdictional level. So if you're doing regional, the issue is understand the boundary of your governance, understand what the shared purpose is that you're trying to achieve with that cloud, and then make sure that you have that ability to serve that need, that whoever the participants are in the community cloud in a regional space understand their respective roles, understand what's going to be offered, and understand that value, as well as the ability to measure it. I think other than, the challenges associated with operating and the ability in terms of the size of the organizations to stand it up, there's anything particularly different between that and operating at a jurisdictional level. The issues are the same that you're going to have to address. It's just the applications might be more, be less, and certainly the scale would be less than at a jurisdictional level. And of course, when you start talking about scope and scale, the whole aspect of cloud is that it can accommodate changes in scale and scope very rapidly. So these are necessarily the limiting factors. It's really organizational rather than the cloud itself.
Okay, another thing, this happens to be referencing the U.S. Does the U.S. have a national discussion on cloud and use within their healthcare delivery systems?
Okay, so recently I have access to and have been reading a paper that's been actually produced at whitehouse.gov on initiatives going forward, of which cloud is a very significant component. And it's not specific for healthcare, but you can tell as you read through that document that, yes, there is absolutely significant potential applicability for that purpose. We're moving very, very aggressively, and actually I was reading a few notes on the President's State of the Union address, which was from yesterday. And, essentially the question is being asked, how are we using, and tell me how we are using IT in these new and emerging capacities to be able to better deliver the services that we deliver. So I think there's a significant activity going to be happening, certainly in the U.S. around enabling this. I think that's going to be good for everybody in the sense that it's going to create a significant industry. An estimate right now that I think it's about, cloud should go through about $150 billion in terms of value in the marketplace just the next 5 years. And that's a much accelerated pace compared to about 2 years ago. The projections were much bigger than that, or less monetarily. So I think this push in the U.S. as well as other organizations such as Infoway trying to wrap their head around it, I think we're going to have a profound effect.
Okay, another comment question here. The cloud is built off a strong internet connection. I guess I would just comment that it has a very strong need for a network connection, but not necessarily the internet, because you could have virtual private network between your systems in that context. But let's assume there is that internet connection, Ron. The question is, how does that impact the adoption and uptake of cloud computing with respect to internet providers?
Okay, this is the basic. This is a challenge that the internet providers are already facing in terms of social, in terms of big. I mean, when you put your music in the cloud, an average music track is about 4 megabytes of data to stream to you. So be addressing this, and I have to say that from a cloud perspective, in terms of health information, would be huge. That would be a profound impact on bandwidth. So in terms of the bandwidth issues, I don't actually think that healthcare is going to create that greater an additional burden what they're already faced with. In terms of pervasive access, that's a different issue, but this also raises another interesting component, which is around the nexus of forces. What we're seeing evolving is that devices will be ubiquitously connected in the sense that you'll be on some network or other transparently all of the time. And we already experience this. I mean, I move around with my smartphone, my device, and it alternates between 3G and Wi-Fi. And if the 3G is not good, it'll go another level on that network. And then in some cases with my laptop, I can be hardwired, I can be Wi-Fi'd, I can be Bluetooth to devices. So the networks are becoming incredibly pervasive. This is still, of course, an issue in certain rural areas, but not unlike, for example, Africa and other parts of the developing world. What I think we're going to see is that the wireless technology, particularly in 3 and 4G networking, will tend to supplant that. So, it used to be, we used to talk about the last mile to consumers' homes, very, very rapidly. So I don't think that that'll be really the rate limiting factor, other than, other things. So healthcare won't, I don't think, will produce a greater burden, for example, than Netflix already has. Netflix, by the way, is a really big problem for a lot of internet providers today. Finding a way to manage it, so I think it's totally doable.
Comments, questions around EMRs, the fact that some of those may be stood up already as application service provider models or cloud-based models. I mean, just a few comments here, and then I'll hand over to Ron. I mean, there's a bit of a subtlety between offering any application, such as an EMR, as an application service provider model, which could be delivered to the end user even through a terminal server like Citrix. So think of that context versus the EMR as software as a service in a traditional computing infrastructure, in other words, not cloud-based, and that same EMR then being stood up in a cloud infrastructure, taking advantages of all the features of cloud, such as elasticity of the computing resources. So there are various nuances here. Ron, do you want to elaborate at all on those with respect to EMRs or even hospital systems?
Well, I mean, so if in an ASP model, an application service provider model, if that provider decides to virtualize that service in terms of the elasticity of the resources they're using, it'll be pretty much transparent to you. Really efficient application usage is about how they're optimizing their own capacity. So notice it much there. But what becomes more profound is if you're talking about, for example, one of the things we think is going to happen is clinicians are already using mobile devices. They're using iPads. They want to use their smartphones. And imagine an e-prescribing app, for example, that is used. The physician has an app for e-prescribing, an app for their referral sources, an app for their reference information. And what they're going to expect is they're going to expect that be actually ubiquitously available to them, even if those apps are provided by 3 different software manufacturers. What they be able to connect that app into that plane of data, which represents their patient cohort, their patient population, as well as their professional peer networks, as well as the other things. So the real profound thing there is that I think the EMRs and the other applications, their value proposition holds in the sense that they provide value in a business context for particular functions to that end user. The real challenge for us in understanding the role of these point-of-service applications in the context of cloud is how can we address providing, authentication consistently, having them sign into a zillion apps. So there's some structural and engineering elements about simplifying that process in order to get the best advantage in terms of the use of cloud capacity. I think be really the challenge from an end user application perspective, regardless of the application is locally on the device or whether the application is software as a service.
Another question: maintain or publish an inventory of cloud applications being developed by various folks across Canada. We don't do that today. We might clearly reference uses in Canada and in healthcare in our papers, but we don't maintain or publish a comprehensive list of that sort. Note for you, Ron, you mentioned the alignment with the EHR roadmap and blueprint. Is there an appetite from jurisdictions to move the existing or upcoming repositories to that cloud environment, and what do you think the cost of implications might be?
So as for appetite, this is very, very emerging. You need to keep in mind we really just started working with, for example, the jurisdictional CIOs around this topic at all, in the last year. And there is interest and angst simultaneously. It's often a lot of pressure, particularly when things that are very visible to decision makers in terms of things like cloud. If it's that visible from an iTunes perspective, from Netflix, from these other sources, the question is, well, why aren't we moving there? Why aren't we doing that? But there is that, what we don't understand yet is exactly what the business cases are in terms of the cost of moving, the time it takes to move, and what the benefits will look like. So it's very, very early days. I couldn't give you a number. Having said that, in other sectors, there are examples where, depending upon the nature of the way that you provided your IT from the outset and the benchmarking done, and this is the other challenge we have to benchmark this from a healthcare perspective in terms of what's the cost to deliver today as opposed to move to virtual capability. But in others, they're talking 30 to 60% reduction in expenses operationally to provide equivalent level of capability. The problem is that those numbers are often a bit clouded. I mean, so what was the capital cost associated with the transition? What were the operational costs of the transition? Is that actually incorporated into that operational number? Is that a runtime number? You've actually done all of the stand-up. So it's really still not clear to us. And I think that one of the challenges we have as a community in Canada going forward, not just Infoway, but our partners, is, should people be trying to do that? Can we go and get firmer numbers? Can we get a better understanding? And can we manage the expectation of our funders and our decision makers effectively to be successful?
We've all the questions. Ron, if you could advance to the next slide, you'll see a number of links that you can reference. Our conference host will post those into the chat window so you can have easy access to those in case you'd like to reference those in the near term. We will also be sending out a link to an evaluation form. We'd love for you to fill that out. That'll come out in a few days from now. And after you complete it and hit the submit button, you'll also get a link to the slide I mentioned earlier that we'll post, and a link to the recording of this webinar if you want to go back to any of that material. And we would welcome you to attend the next event. Ron, if you could advance one more. We mentioned earlier this next event will be on cloud computing again, but with a special focus on the privacy and security considerations. We have a lot to say about that topic and figured we would give it a full hour as well. So that'll be Thursday, March 7th at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And just as a reminder, we start promptly at the top of the hour and we will end promptly at the top of the hour. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you found this valuable, and please let us know what you thought so we can improve on it for next time. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference. You may now disconnect.